Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Arkham Sessions, brought to you by Comics Alliance. I'm Brian Ward, and with me, as always, is the great Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's the beginning of a new week, so I'm excited. Lots of cool stuff going to happen, I'm sure. This is the Arkham Sessions, guys. It is our job to analyze every episode of Batman, the animated series. Drea, you are the psychologist. Explain what it is we do here.
Well, every week we focus on one episode of Batman, the animated series, and we try to lift out the psychological science of each episode and talk more about how those themes and topics are relevant to our everyday lives. And it is a psychological podcast, meaning we focus primarily and pretty much exclusively on the psychology of the show. I would even go further to say on the psychology of Batman characters, narrative stories. Essentially, these stories are not unique to Batman the Animated Series. We've talked about how these stories are based off of comic book stories. There's a relationship to films. So it's not specific to BTAS, but as we've talked about before, that show introduces a lot of backstories and backgrounds of these really important and very popular characters.
And one of the reasons why we're bringing this up now is because this episode in particular deals with one of those things you just mentioned, a backstory, which is one of those things that you absolutely love to have. You love to see where characters came from so that you know how they're doing in terms of progress.
Right.
And this week we're doing Robin's Reckoning Part 1. We were going to do both volumes, but we took a look at both volumes, and frankly, there is a lot of great stuff to cover, especially in this first episode where we basically get Robin's backstory, Dick Grayson's backstory.
Yeah.
So let's focus on Part 1 for this episode, and we will focus on Part 2 for next episode. Let's get into it. We are watching Batman and Robin sitting on top of a building waiting.
If I knew it was going to take this long, I would have brought my homework.
Waiting for this extortion racket, and these saboteurs to do their thing. Batman is as patient as we have ever seen him.
You sure about this extortion ring? Uh-huh. It's been 4 hours. Uh-huh. You still think they'll show?
Uh-huh. Robin, on the other hand, ready to go. He's antsy.
Yeah, he's eager, but I think it's developmentally normal for him. Yeah. He mentions that he could have been doing his homework. So it's a reminder that he's in college. He's still, we would probably guess, maybe late teens.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because in the one episode where Fear of Victory, his good friend is a senior at college because he is then drafted into professional football for the Gotham Knights. So presumably you wouldn't necessarily have a freshman who's hanging out with a senior like that, but we'll say he's 18, 19, somewhere around there.
It could happen. Identifying and understanding his age is important because of the way that the story unfolds.
Yeah.
So I like that they started off reminding us that Dick is still in college.
Yeah.
So Batman has years on him. He has experience that Robin doesn't have. And it's an interesting dynamic where Robin really just wants to get his feet wet and get going here. He's very eager. And Batman is demonstrating a lot more patience.
Yeah.
And determination in a different way. So
there's something I love about Gotham City, and that's that the criminal element certainly are snappy dressers. When the saboteurs actually scale a building that is currently being constructed, and they're going to sabotage the building so that there's a major accident or that something happens, they're all wearing suits. You know, I think that's interesting that
you gotta look nice.
Everyone climbing up onto this, not scaffolding, but all of this heavy machinery, and you're on the beams. One of the guys, I noticed his jacket even buttoned. So like they are looking good. Bow ties. regular neckties.
Could be an indication of their wealth.
You don't generally have the wealthy guys up there sabotaging the beams of, you would have your thugs.
Well,
doing
no, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That the criminals are really the ones running Gotham City
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that they're all well off. And even the ones that you're considering to be, the muscle of the operations.
They get paid well.
Yeah.
Let's talk about. This goes back to our previous episode, and that is the Cape and Cowl conspiracy. Batman is once again interrogating with fear, which is something we don't see all that often. We've always seen him be intimidating. We've always seen him be someone who is feared. But we rarely see him putting someone's life in jeopardy in order to get information. And that is exactly what he does here after he and Robin both end up having a bit of a sparring match with the criminals. They let a couple of them go, but one of them is left dangling.
He's all we need.
That guy gives a name.
Hey, it's Marin! Billy Marin!
This kind of spooks Batman a little bit. He then turns to Robin and says,
Let it go. The police can take it from here.
which is something that Batman doesn't often say.
Right.
As we pointed out in the last episode, Batman kind of wants to be Batman. He wants to be able to take down crime by himself. But here he says the police can take it from here, and he actually sends Robin away to get the Batmobile, and we find out that he is actually learning more.
All right, scum bucket. It's you, me, and 30 stories. You're gonna tell me exactly what I want to know.
We then see Batman and Robin returning home to Wayne Manor in the Batmobile, and Batman drops Robin off, much to Robin's dismay.
It's something I have to do alone.
So whatever this Billy Marin guy is about, Batman doesn't want Robin to have any part of it.
Right. And I think it brings up some tension. Clearly there's something going on, or there has been something going on prior to Billy Marin's, this particular night, where Batman discovers that Billy Marin is involved. Mm-hmm. And so you get a sense that clearly they have perhaps had some disagreements or arguments around Robin's involvement, whether it be Batman protecting him, whether it be Batman, as Robin has said, shutting him out. But Robin he's clearly resentful, and he's starting to feel that way even more.
Right.
And, it's kind of an interesting dynamic. They're really not getting along.
Yeah, so Robin goes to plug in this Billy Marin's name in the computer and finds that it is an alias for none other than
Tony Zuko.
For those who aren't aware, Tony Zuko is the man responsible for the death of the majority of the Flying Graysons. When I say the majority, I mean everyone but Dick. We see the origin, Dick Grayson not becoming Robin, but we see Dick Grayson losing his parents. We have seen throughout the course of Batman the Animated Series, on several occasions, Bruce's loss of his parents. Mm-hmm. But this is the first time in the few appearances we've had with Robin that he has had a loss in his past. No one's ever really brought it up before. But here we see in, this amazing episode, a fantastic origin story for Dick Grayson.
Right.
Okay, Dick, you ready?
Ready, Dad?
The Flying Graysons are bringing up young Dick to be a trapeze artist like themselves. And they are doing a lot of rehearsing. In fact, one circus employee even mentions,
That Grayson kid's a real boy wonder.
turns out Robin's had this little
He's had the nickname for a while.
nickname for a while. And we then, as they're leaving, young Dick ends up witnessing this extortionist, Tony Zuko, being kicked out of the circus manager owner's trailer.
I run an honest business here. I don't pay two-bit hoodlums protection money.
Insurance, Mr. Haley. You know, from accidents?
Owner's not having any of it. Sends Zuko away. Zuko is upset about this. And of course, Dick, being the witness, gets a really good glimpse at Tony Zuko. So that night, Zuko can be seen fraying one of the cables to one of the trapeze bars. And as he's leaving and the Graysons are about to take the ring, Dick ends up seeing Tony in disguise walk past them.
Hey, that's the guy that... Come on, honey, we're on.
Now, Drea, this is something I want to talk a little bit more in depth on later, but at this moment, Dick says, that's the guy I saw earlier, and his mother hushes him up, and they take the stage.
Mm-hmm. They're about to start this performance is actually for a charity that Bruce Wayne is setting up, that he's funded.
Yeah.
So it's a very special event. You can see that very important people are there. Bruce Wayne is in the audience. So his parents hush him up a bit. They rush him back onto the stage or to the circus ring. They're really not listening to what he has to say.
But if I see someone that I just saw the owner of the circus kicking out and that guy threatening him, and I see that guy clearly in disguise walking past my family, I'm going to do a little more and be like, no, Mom, I'm not going to hush up. I'm probably going to stop her right then and there and say, I saw that guy threaten the circus if we didn't give him money. And by the way, he didn't look like that earlier. I don't know. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but yeah.
I'll say a couple things. One is that remember that this is Robin's memory. This is his flashback. We know this because later Batman has his flashback about these events. In knowing that this is Robin's flashback, we have to realize that after experiencing a trauma, your memory for that trauma or for the series of events up to the trauma and even following the trauma may be a little bit inaccurate.
Okay.
And part of that is because your memory is working against some of these emotional responses that you're feeling. A lot of times when we are the only ones who survive something, we experience survivor's guilt, which I know you've heard of. We experience an incredible sense of rethinking the event. Could I have done something differently? Were these missed opportunities? Could I have saved them?
Right.
So ultimately, I think that part of this memory is filtered with those feelings of regret and guilt, and the fact that he's thinking back on this and picking up on moments where he could have saved his parents' lives, basically. So there is, I'm not saying it's inaccurate. I'm saying that the way that he's remembering this event could be slightly different, than how it really happened.
But as we pointed out in a previous episode, POV, you established that memory isn't nearly as accurate as people like to think it is.
Right.
So it is possible that he's misremembering. But we'll talk a little bit about that later because he actually brings it up. So the Graysons do, in fact, take the stage. And unfortunately, frayed rope comes unhinged and Mom and Dad fall to their deaths. Dick gets to witness the entire thing as well as the entire audience of the circus. And it's unfortunate. It's a beautifully animated scene where we don't actually see them fall.
And it's interesting because it's really horrific, but like you said, we don't see anything. We see we see them performing. We see the frayed rope begin to rip, and then we see Dick's mother meet. She takes a leap onto to meet his father in this performance, and then the rope comes back broken.
Yeah.
And that's all we see. And of course we hear a gasp from the audience, but really we don't hear much, we don't see anything. It's really as little as you see, it's still very, very scary and very horrific.
It's a great scene. It's followed up by Tintin coming up to, young Gordon, full redhead, but he's got Tintin's little spike going straight up. He doesn't actually have bangs. He's just got a point in the front of his head. But young Gordon, redhead.
Well, we knew this.
Yeah.
We knew Commissioner Gordon was a redhead, but now we get to see him back in his younger adult years, and he's looking quite good.
What's
you should
interesting
be very
to me,
happy about this.
I am very happy about it, but it isn't very, I should say, it's not very encouraging for me, because let's just say that because of a conversation that Dick has as Batman is dropping Dick off at Wayne Manor, as Batman is dropping Robin off at Wayne Manor, that he basically says, sometimes I have to go out and do things without any explanation to you.
Right.
And Robin responds,
Hey, that line worked great in 6th grade, but in case you hadn't noticed.
We'll discuss this later.
so around the age of 11, at least he's been hanging out with Bruce Wayne. But let's just say it's 11 years old is when Dick Grayson loses his parents. And then we established a couple minutes ago that he's probably 18, 19 now. So let's just say that like 7, 8 years, Gordon went from brilliantly fiery red, orange hair to white. To the white that we know now.
He's in a very, very high stress position.
That is true. That is true.
At least he has hair.
Well, yeah, and that's there's something to be said about that as well. But Gordon promises to find the culprits.
He's compassionate, but what's interesting is that Bruce Wayne steps in and he's particularly compassionate. He asks about Dick's family, if he has any other family members around. He learns that Dick is very close with the circus performers, and then that's pretty much his family. But other than that, he has no one.
Bruce offers to take Dick Grayson in.
Well, and it's because the idea that Tony Zuko would possibly pursue and even harm Dick Grayson.
Right.
So staying at the circus is probably not a good idea for his safety.
But let's talk about his psychology. Would it have been better to keep someone like Dick Grayson at the circus, because we see how torn he is when he has to leave the only family he's really ever known behind?
Yeah.
Versus living with this stranger? What would you say? You deal with a lot of children now.
Yeah.
What would you say?
It's a tough one, because when he leaves the circus and says his goodbyes, you get a sense that these circus performers are quite close with him.
Yeah.
They're crying. They're saying all these great things about him. They're clearly going to miss him. So I would assume that he's been with these people since he was born. It's essentially his family. But above that, we're being told that he has a support system, and he's going to be taken away from that support system.
Right.
So I think realistically, it would have been a bad idea to take him away from that connection or those connections, because we know that in terms of protecting youths from developing serious mental illness, something like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, things like that often follow traumas, that one of the most important things is to stay connected with a strong support system and to identify those people, those friends, family members, neighbors, other individuals that have shown great support and who will continue to give support. So my worry for him is that you've just taken that away from him.
Especially since when he goes to Wayne Manor, we see that he doesn't really get to see Bruce all that much. He is, as Alfred says,
just aching for some of that attention.
Bruce Wayne is constantly going out to have business meetings at night. He isn't around for young Dick Grayson. He is not giving him the companionship that he needs.
Well, and Dick thinks that he's on business. And while it's his job to be Batman, I believe that Bruce Wayne is at the core of his efforts to be out every night and not spend time with Dick. He is, I believe, essentially protecting Dick and trying to find the person that murdered his family.
Absolutely.
And avenging that terrible loss. I think that Batman sees it entirely differently. I don't think that he thinks he's neglecting him. I think he thinks he's trying to do what Dick can't do right now, which is to be Batman.
And we see that Dick Grayson is left in Bruce's old room that he had at his age. Something that I noticed is the room itself is incredibly stark. There is little to no decor whatsoever. There might be a little painting there or something, but the bed is just in the center of the room. I mean, it's not even up against a wall or anything like that. It is smack dab in the center of the room, almost an island in this ocean of just nothing. And
at least he has a bed. It's not as bad as Frank Miller's
well,
All-Star
sure.
Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
Where
He's not meant
like
to
in
eat
some
rats
dungeon.
down in the Batcave. But the room itself has no personality. It's as cold as Bruce is sort of being to Dick personally. I realize that Batman is out there fighting for little Dick Grayson, but Bruce is being particularly cold.
Yeah. And Alfred acknowledges that, and Bruce agrees with him. So he tries to offer some time with him.
Yeah.
He does try to make a connection with Dick, and they have this a really incredibly heartwarming yet a very sad story that they share together, where Bruce asks him how he's doing and reassures him that things will get better.
You keep thinking, if only I'd done something differently. If only I could have warned them. But there isn't anything you could have done. There isn't anything either of us could have done.
Your mom and dad? Does the hurt ever go away?
I wish I could say yes. But it will get better in time. For you.
Things will get better for you.
Yeah.
As if he's saying, I'm a lost cause. Things will never get better for me. I might not to get that fulfilling life that you have an opportunity to have. I don't have that chance anymore. And so, again, it's kind of this, it's a very sad conversation that they have. It's hopeful for Dick, but it's incredibly sad to hear Bruce Wayne kind of express his beliefs about his own future.
It's funny when you mention it that way, it reminds me of Darth Vader speaking to Luke, where he's just like, nope, not for me.
Yeah.
It's too late for me. And I kind of see it the same way, where Batman is trying to prevent Robin from becoming a lost cause, which is why he drops him back off at the Batcave. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you kind of get that sense that Batman has already resigned himself to the idea that he will forever be Batman. Right. And there will be no comfort for him.
And it may explain why he's somewhat distant, or just naturally he didn't spend a lot of time with Dick and he left him alone for long periods of time. It wasn't a deliberate neglect. It may have been that he really didn't want to form that connection, really didn't want to become a mentor to Dick because he didn't want to see Dick grow up to be just like him.
But like you said, he is out there on the streets trying to find Tony Zuko. In fact, at one point, we see that he is in disguise, out in the alleyways, throwing dice.
Tough luck. Maybe I can change the way they roll.
And what's interesting to me is that Bruce looks almost identical to the way he looked in The Forgotten.
Oh, yeah.
That's sort of that's a go-to disguise for him. Whiten the hair, put on the newsy cap, give yourself some 5 o'clock shadow. and a pea coat and then go roll some dice. But he's trying to find Tony Zuko.
Can't help wondering how he's keeping out of sight.
You do an awful lot of wondering with someone we ain't ever seen before.
I did find it interesting that he seems to sort of have a go-to costume.
Well, he might enjoy that. He might enjoy being other people.
Yeah. He does, however, find out that Zuko is hanging out at his uncle's place, and that is, of course, at Stromwell's. We've seen Stromwell before. Batman goes and visits, and this particular set of scenes or series of sequences, I don't think I have ever seen Batman presented better in Batman the Animated Series. The animation is fantastic. You see him in mostly shadow and just glimpses of light, and he's not the Batman that we've been seeing.
No.
This one actually looks a little more terrifying
Yeah.
than most times that we've seen him.
And his personality is somewhat darker.
Yeah.
He's not cracking those terrible jokes. Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure if he smiles in this episode. It is very dark. It's very serious. I can see why it got such acclaim, such attention.
Mm-hmm. And he lets Stromwell know that he wants Zuko bad.
Real bad.
Of course, Stromwell explains that Zuko's not there. He hasn't seen him. Of course, we know that he's completely lying because Zuko is listening in. Batman leaves, but not before bugging the room. Zuko comes in, all celebratory, but Stromwell's not having it. He's really upset that this kid has started bringing the heat down on the Stromwell household.
Fool! You and your penny anti-extortion racket! Look what you brought on my house!
Hey, come on! Stop already. We can handle the Batman.
No, buddy boy, this time you've gone too far.
Batman then comes after Zuko because he's heard the entire thing go down. He nearly gets him, but sadly loses him. And that's what brings us up to current day. Dick is yelling into the radio over to the Batmobile.
You can't take this one. Zuko's mine.
Sorry, Robin, but on this team, I call the shots.
But I've waited half my life.
Batman out.
Oh no, he's not gonna ace me out.
He's not going to just sit back and let Batman take the one thing he's wanted half of his life. So he gets onto his Robin cycle and rides off, and he is going to go try to find Zuko himself. And that's basically where this episode ends. There is so much to talk about in terms of Drea. I'm dying to know, how is Dick Grayson now versus how he was when he was 11?
Well, let's first talk about how he was coping shortly after his parents' deaths. He was pretty much left alone at Wayne Manor. Bruce was off doing what Dick imagined was his business, business meetings. And of course, Alfred was around, but he couldn't be, Alfred just simply can't be that father figure or mentor that someone like Bruce could be. And so we do know that there was a lack of social support. There was a lack of parenting. We didn't get a lot of information about, was he in school? How were his peer relationships? So there's a lot of missing information. But even getting to see those moments where he's alone eating dinner and where he has that really just very meaningful conversation with Bruce about connecting over both of them losing their parents in a very tragic way and understanding how to move forward, and Bruce encouraging him that things are going to get better, while implying, of course, that things never got better for him.
Right. He also encourages him and says that there's nothing he could have done.
Yes.
Again, it's one of those things where, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because the idea that we're seeing his flashback, his memory, implies that he might be putting a little more on himself than he should be.
He's connecting the dots now as a young adult, realizing that's the guy that killed my parents. And so as he's remembering the events, he's almost finding ways that he could have prevented it. And that's a natural thing. The questions like, what could I have done differently? Could I have saved them? What if I had said something? What if I spoke up? I'm cowardly for being quiet. I'm cowardly for not saying something. Those kinds of thoughts. I'm not saying that he remembered it completely and accurately, but we have to remember too, he was 11 years old. Even if he spoke up, what does an 11-year-old say? What did his parents hear? So I think we can sit here and logically say, well, he really could have done something. He saw Tony Zuko. He mentioned something to his parents. Why didn't he do more? And I think that we're just as blaming as he is right now in his guilty, kind of regretful state of mind.
Which is totally why I wanted to focus on part 1 in this particular episode of the podcast, because I feel like we should be in the same mind frame that Robin is. And
well, we should understand what his perspective is. And again, this episode is done so beautifully because we can see that he has his own flashback and the way things were according to his memory. And then we have Batman's flashback, which shows him nearly getting the guy and also experiencing regret and guilt for not doing what he should have done and
By the way,
have done to avenge Robin.
Did you notice that in Batman's flashback is when he looks the coolest, the darkest, the most mysterious? This is how Batman sees Batman.
He's a little bit different.
Yeah,
you don't want to see me grumpy.
Yeah.
You don't want to see me grumpy.
So jumping back to your question about how Robin's functioning, back when he was 11 or 12, shortly after his parents' deaths, while we don't have a lot of information, we can see that, sure, he's a very lonely boy. He feels somewhat neglected. He expresses he wants to spend more time with Bruce, but we don't get an indication that there's a lot of other problematic symptoms going on that we should be really worried about. And I want to be very careful to explain, what happens after a traumatic event like this. We can't deny that he witnessed something that was very horrific to see. I can't imagine a worse childhood trauma to experience than to see your parents be killed. We know from a lot of research, from a lot of clinical experience, and luckily from the experiences and expressions from youths who have sadly similar stories to this, that children are very resilient. And the majority of children who experience something so tragic will bounce back. And I think that it's always a surprising thing for people to hear, but it's really important to state that.
Well, the immediate thought from the layperson is simply that child has been traumatized too early, and they will go the rest of their lives, and somehow or another, even if they suppress it, it will come back up in some form or another as they grow old. But you are saying that they are actually surprisingly resilient, more resilient than we expected them to be.
And I think our expectation should be around that knowledge that children are as resilient as they are. We know that about 68 to 75% of children under 18 will experience some kind of trauma. Certainly not something to this degree. Not everyone will experience something this horrific and this tragic, but we know that the majority of children will experience a trauma. We've talked about traumas before, but as a reminder, a trauma is an event that includes actual or threatened death or injury. So this could include experiencing it yourself or witnessing someone else experience something like that. So there's no doubt that he experienced what we would consider a traumatic event.
Is there an age at which a child can experience a trauma and adequately get over it with time and with counseling or support versus an age at which it becomes a little more difficult? For instance, if Dick Grayson were 5 years old and saw this versus Dick Grayson at 11 years old seeing this?
That's a great question. And a lot of factors come into play when we try to predict the outcomes of kids who have experienced traumas. And again, while the majority of kids have experienced a trauma at some point in their life, only about 5% actually develop post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's the full-blown, meeting criteria, meeting clinical criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. 5%. It's a really low number. That doesn't mean that kids and adolescents who experience trauma won't have difficulties, right? So they could experience depression. They could experience, feeling unwanted. They could feel lack of positive feelings like joy or pleasure. They could have really bad nightmares or flashbacks. They could be socially isolated. They could think about suicide. I mean, all these things aren't necessarily packaged into that post-traumatic stress disorder, diagnosis, but would certainly, of course, demand attention and possibly require treatment. On one side of the coin, I'm saying children are quite resilient. On the other side of the coin, I'm saying, nonetheless, we should really pay attention to how kids are responding and how they're coping after a trauma. And to answer your question, it really depends on what happens. It really depends on what kind of traumatic experience a child has. So for children who are really young, they may experience a sexual-related trauma like sexual abuse, and they may not have a memory of it because they're so young. And one might even expect that they can recover from that with, in a very healthy way, with a lot of resiliency, and not even need something like therapy. On the other hand, if a child is older, let's say, Dick is, we're assuming 11 or 12 when he experiences his parents' deaths, that's certainly an age of concern.
Now, I want to make it very clear here, just as a sort of public service announcement, we're not suggesting that if you traumatize a child at a young enough age, you're in the clear.
No.
Just because they're too young to necessarily remember later, we don't want to suggest that anyone go out and go, free pass.
No, and there is actually a lot of research in developmental psychopathology that actually looks at what you're saying right now. What are the different impacts of trauma depending on factors like age, neurodevelopment, academic level, intellectual level, type of trauma, social support after a trauma. All these things that are really actually part of this very complex development of resiliency and unhealthy coping that follows a trauma. So I think a better way maybe to answer your question is there is a spectrum of functioning following traumas. On one end of the spectrum, you might expect to see some problematic symptoms related to PTSD, depression, suicidality, isolation, so forth. On the other side of the spectrum, you might see a lot of healthy functioning or healthy coping. Somebody who's able to learn from that particular traumatic event, turn it into something positive, turn it into something that, of course, we might even point to Batman as someone who's been able to develop this really dedicated mission to turn the loss that he experienced into something that is meaningful to him and fulfilling to him.
One might even call it, I don't know, for lack of a better term, fanaticism.
Oh, no. Oh. There you go again. So so I think your questions are great, but, again, it's a very complex, the brain is very complicated. Mm-hmm. So we can't really ever predict, that child's going to get PTSD or that child won't.
So let's talk about Dick Grayson now versus then. We've explained that he may or may not carry residual trauma. We don't really know much about his support system afterward. We only know that he wasn't getting any for a little while. Mm-hmm. Clearly that has changed since then because the two of them are still pretty close.
And we have previous episodes of the animated series to show us that he has developed really great peer relationships in college.
Mm-hmm. So how is Dick now, especially when the name Tony Zuko comes into play?
I think he's justified in wanting to be involved in finding Tony and taking him down. I think that that's not particularly unhealthy for him to have those thoughts. I think it's only natural. And I don't know about, I think Batman trying to shut him off of this and to independently pursue Tony has to do more with his psychology and his own feeling of regret that he initially, he dropped the ball. He was supposed to do this 10 years ago, and he wasn't able to. So I think this has to do with his own feelings of regret and failure. And I don't know that he understands that Robin needs to be involved in this for him to actually feel that he's done what he could, everything he could,
right,
to really avenge what happened.
Lucky for me, you're such a good conversationalist.
There's really nothing that we see here that's necessarily unhealthy in terms of Robin's determination, his level of anger, his level of resentment. I think that's all natural. I think that's all, as I said before, developmentally normal, as well as emotionally. Of course he wants to be involved in taking down the man that killed his parents. And we're not seeing things that we would be concerned about. So we're not seeing him have nightmares about the original trauma.
Right.
We're not seeing him develop really unhealthy relationships because of the trauma. We're not seeing him have unhealthy, harmful thoughts like I want to end my life or I want to hurt myself because this world isn't worth living in. Some of these things that we might see in real life that we would be worried about.
So yeah, I'm very excited to see what might happen to young Master Dick Grayson and older Master Bruce Wayne, two people who are very much cut from the same cloth, but maybe have different outcomes in their lives.
I think Bruce is hoping that Dick has a very different outcome, and that's why he's so determined to get Tony. And I think it's a really nicely written episode.
Yeah.
Again, a little bit darker, but it has that theme around choosing your destiny and, understanding that bad things happen to us and that we can choose to make different meanings from that. So it's
particularly if you have a support system around you.
Well, yes. I mean, that's a huge part of your ability to really get out of the darkness. But I like that there's an emphasis on, it's really not so much about the idea that something bad happened to you, but that it's what you do with that traumatic event. It's how you make meaning out of that and how you move past it. So I'm very excited to get to the second part of this story.
Yeah, me too. And that's coming up next week, Robin's Reckoning Part 2. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter. We are at Arkham Sessions. You can drop us an email, arkhamsessions@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. Drea, where can they find you?
I am at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can also find her at her website, underthemaskonline.com. You can even drop her an email there. And we definitely want to hear from you. So if you've got thoughts about this episode, let us hear them. If you've got thoughts or questions about next week's episode, please drop us a line, let us know, and we will certainly address them on next week's show. Until then, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And we are
the Arkham Sessions.